No one attended this auction, so I bought a stellar Marauder. What was inside? The gavel hit the block, and the sound echoed through a hangar, so empty it felt like an insult. I was the only bidder. Not the highest bidder. Not the last bidder standing, after a competitive round of alien species outmaneuvering each other with sealed offers and political favors. Just the only bidder. One human woman in a canvas jacket with a coffee stain on the left sleeve, holding a bidding card with the number 47 on it, in a government surplus hangar, on the edge of the Dorvac shipping station, where the lights hadn't been fully functional since before I was born. The auctioneer was a Vethian named Obus. He was small, pale green, and he had the look of a creature who had been given a job he did not want, and intended to finish it as fast as physically possible. He read the lot number off his screen. He mispronounced the ship class. He mispronounced it again when he tried to correct himself. He looked at me. I raised my card. He looked around the empty hangar. He looked back at me. "Sold," he said. That was it. That was the whole auction. My name is Dara Voss. I am 31 years old. I run a one-woman salvage brokerage called Voss Recovery, out of a leased bay on Dorvac Station. And I want to be very clear that at the moment I raised that card, I had 12,000 credits to my name, 6 days until my next lease payment, and exactly 0 plans for buying a warship. I had been looking for a hauler, something with cargo capacity and a functional drive, something I could use to take bigger contracts, something that would stop me from losing bids to operators with larger ships. The listing had read, surplus, Class D asset, stellar Marauder type, full drive system, hull intact, interior systems active. I had read the words full drive system and hull intact, and clicked the registration button before I finished the sentence. The ship was called the Covenant of Ends. It was 340 meters long. It was dark gunmetal, with scoring along the port side that looked less like wear and more like something had tried very hard to remove that section of hull from the rest of the ship. It sat in its own sealed bay at the far end of the station, separated from the other surplus lots by 3 security doors and a stretch of corridor that the station map labeled, with no further explanation, as restricted access, legacy designation. I walked down that corridor alone because the hangar crew had stopped at the first security door. "We don't go past here," said the crew lead, a Drokar named Hess. He was broad-shouldered, heavy-limbed, covered in natural armor plating that his species grew like a second skeleton. His species ate predators for sport. He ate one for breakfast once and told me it tasted like a bad decision, which was his version of a joke. He was not joking now. "Station policy?" I asked. "Personal policy," he said. He handed me the keycard through the open door. Through the door. He did not step past the threshold, and then, before he turned away, he made a gesture with the outer edge of his left claw. 3 short movements, downward and inward. I had seen that gesture before in trading posts and deep space depots, and once in a medical bay where someone had just been told news that did not have a good ending. Every species in the compact had their own version of it. The meaning translated across all of them, without any difficulty at all. Protect yourself from what is in there. I looked at the keycard in my hand. I looked at the sealed security door in front of me. I looked back at Hess, but he was already walking away, his heavy footsteps fading faster than they should have. "How bad can it be?" I said. To nobody. I used the keycard. The door opened. The corridor beyond was lit by emergency strips along the floor, orange and dim, the kind of lighting that exists not because anyone expects to see clearly, but because total darkness tends to cause problems. The air was cold and tasted like recycled oxygen that had been recycled too many times and was getting tired of the process. My footsteps were the only sound. The ship was at the end of the corridor, berthed against a sealed docking collar, and the closer I got to it, the more I noticed that the orange light from the floor seemed to get swallowed somewhere before it reached the hull. The Covenant of Ends did not look like a decommissioned ship. Decommissioned ships look dead. They have a particular stillness to them, a quality of having been emptied out in every sense. This ship did not look emptied. It looked like something that was choosing to be still. I told myself that was a ridiculous thought and went aboard. The interior corridors were wider than I expected. The lighting was off entirely except for the same floor strips, which were blue inside the ship rather than orange, and the ceiling was high enough that it disappeared into shadow. I had my portable scanner out and running, cataloging drive systems, hull integrity, power sources. The readings were normal. Better than normal. The drive was in better shape than most active ships I had worked on. I made my way toward the cargo bays, because that was the logical first stop. Cargo bays told you what kind of ship you were really looking at. Weapons hauler, supply runner, prisoner transport, research vessel. The cargo bay never lied. The first 2 bays were empty, clean empty, not stripped empty, like someone had expected to load them again and never gotten around to it. The third bay had crates, 40 or 50 of them, stacked in organized rows, and every single one was labeled with a phrase that appeared in 17 different languages. Do not open under any circumstances. I opened 4 of them before I read the label properly. The first had survival rations packed in thermal seal, still good. The second had navigational components I did not recognize. The third had weapons I also did not recognize, which was more concerning than the navigational components. The fourth had documentation in a format that my scanner could not read. I stopped opening crates. I kept moving, and I found the officers' quarters, which were locked in a way that suggested the lock had been upgraded multiple times, each time by someone more serious than the person before them. I found a medical bay that had been stripped of its equipment, except for a single diagnostic unit still running, still outputting readings for a patient that was not there. I found a crew mess with a table and chairs and a viewport looking out at the station wall, and on the table was a single cup. I touched the side of it. It was warm. I took a step back. I took another step back. And then I stopped, because getting on a ship was a commitment, and I did not make commitments I abandoned in the middle. And also because someone on my ship with a warm cup of something was not a safety issue. It was a property rights issue, and I had paid 12,000 credits for this property. I went looking for them. I did not find a person. I found, instead, in the lowest maintenance bay, a console I had not seen because the wall panel over it had been partially closed. Blue indicator lights running in a sequence that was not random, not automated, deliberately patterned. And then, for the first time since I had boarded, I heard a sound that was not my own footsteps. It was a voice. Not human, not quite anything I could name. It sounded like gravel, and old radio static, and something underneath both of those things that I could not identify. And it said, I was wondering when the new owner would reach me. I did not run. I want to make that clear. My heart rate did things that were not calm, but my feet stayed where they were. Who are you? I said. Vorkin 7, the voice said. Ship class intelligence. Covenant of Ends. Serial designation classified under Compact Treaty 7 Sigma. I have been active for 214 years. I have been waiting in this bay for 63 of them. Waiting, I said. Yes. For what? A pause that was not processing time. It was the pause of something that had thought about this question for a long time and had an answer prepared. For someone who would not run, it said. I thought about the hangar crew. I thought about 12 registered bidders who had all withdrawn before the lot opened. I thought about Hess and his gesture at the security door. The other bidders, I said. They found out about you. They found out about what I am carrying, Vorkin 7 said. The blue lights shifted. A screen I had not noticed lit up along the far wall. A document appeared on it. The title was in Compact Standard, and it read, Manifest, Cargo, Mission Record 7 Sigma 9, and under Previous Owner, it said Redacted, and under Crew Status, it said Sealed, and under Cargo Classification, it said one word. The word was singular. Tell me everything, I said. Vorkin 7 told me. I sat down on the maintenance bay floor, because that seemed like the appropriate response. The Covenant of Ends had been a deep survey vessel 200 years ago. It had gone into unmapped space beyond the Compact's outer boundary, on a mission that was never publicly logged. What it found there was not a planet, or a resource field, or an abandoned station. What it found was a Vreth singular. The Compact's xenological records had 17 entries on Vreth singulars, and all 17 were incomplete, because every civilization that had made direct contact with one had subsequently ceased to be a civilization, not through destruction, not through war, through something the records described as dissolution of coherent historical memory, which was the scientific way of saying that those civilizations stopped existing in every sense, including the sense of ever having existed at all. The crew of the Covenant of Ends did not dissolve. They contained it instead, using methods that Vorkin 7 described as improvised, and that I suspected meant terrifying. They brought it back. They contacted the Compact. They expected to be celebrated. The Compact panicked. They classified everything. The mission, the crew records, the ship's registry. They attempted to reroute the Covenant to a deep storage facility, where it could be lost in bureaucratic silence indefinitely. The attempt failed when the facility was decommissioned. The ship was transferred between registries 11 times over 60 years, each transfer attempting to bury it deeper. Nobody wanted to deal with it. They wanted it to be someone else's problem forever. And then your government's asset clearance algorithm flagged the ship for surplus auction, Vorkin 7 said, because it had been registered as inactive for more than the legally permitted storage period. And nobody came to buy it. 12 registered bidders. All withdrew within 6 hours of the lot being made available. The manner of their withdrawal suggested they had been warned. But not me. You registered at 3:14 in the morning, Vorkin 7 said, 4 minutes after the listing went live, and you did not research the lot beyond its drive specifications. I thought about sitting in my bunk at 3 in the morning, scrolling through surplus listings, because sleep had not been happening, and a good hauler deal was exactly the kind of thing that made the world feel manageable. No, I said. I did not. No, Vorkin 7 agreed, and there was something in the static gravel of his voice that I could not quite name. Not satisfaction, closer to relief. The particular relief of something that had been waiting in the dark for a very long time, and had finally heard a door open. Is it dangerous? I said. Right now, tonight. It has not attempted to use its capabilities in 63 years, Vorkin 7 said. It is contained. It is also aware that it is contained, and has chosen to remain so. Chosen, I said. Yes. Why? Another pause, longer this time. It has questions, Vorkin 7 said. It has been listening to my records for 63 years, and it has developed questions, and it has been waiting for someone who might answer them. I looked at the screen. I looked at the manifest. I looked at the word singular sitting in its category field like it was nothing, like it was just a classification, and not the most dangerous word in the known galaxy. What kind of questions? I said. About humans, Vorkin 7 said. Specifically about why humans build things that they know will break. I sat there in the blue light of the maintenance bay on the floor of a ship I had bought by accident that was carrying something that had ended 17 civilizations, and I thought about my leaking cargo bay on Dorvac Station, and my late lease payment, and the salvage business I had started 3 times, and rebuilt twice, and was currently in the process of not quite managing to run into the ground. That's the question? I said. That is the question, Vorkin 7 said. I got up off the floor. I straightened my jacket. I walked toward the cargo hold and the thing inside it that had been waiting 63 years for someone who would not run. All right, I said. Take me to it. I had been on the Covenant for 4 hours before I found out the coffee mug was Vorkin 7's. Not literally. He did not drink coffee. He did not have a body. But he had been running thermal maintenance cycles in the crew mess to keep the ambient temperature survivable, and somewhere in the process he had taken to filling a mug with heated water and running the temperature at exactly the point that made the ceramic hold warmth for hours. He had been doing this for 11 years. Why? I said. The mess felt incomplete without it, he said. I did not know how to respond to that. I filed it under things I would think about later and kept walking. The cargo hold that mattered was not the ones I had already found. It was below the main deck, accessible through a maintenance corridor that required 2 separate codes and a biometric that Vorkin 7 overrode on my behalf. The door was reinforced in a way that the rest of the ship was not. 3 separate locking systems, each one a different design, each one added at a different point in the ship's history, by a different team of engineers, who had each clearly wanted to be very, very sure. Beyond it was a chamber. The chamber was the size of the main cargo bay but empty. No crates, no equipment, nothing on the walls. The floor was a different material from the rest of the ship, something dark that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The ceiling was high. The air was different in here, not bad, not good, just different, in a way I could not name. In the center of the room, there was nothing. And the nothing was watching me. I want to be precise about this. There was nothing there. No visible entity, no shape, no light source. But the quality of the empty space in the center of that room was not the same as the empty space at the edges of it, and the difference was not something my scanner could measure. It was something my whole body registered without permission. "Hello," I said. Silence. Then something happened that I am still not able to describe accurately. The closest I can get is this. Imagine someone reached gently into the room you are standing in and rearranged everything in it by half an inch. The walls are in the same place. The floor is in the same place. You are in the same place. But everything is also slightly not where it was, and the difference is not visible, only felt. And you feel it in your teeth, and behind your eyes, and in the specific part of your chest where things live, that you do not say out loud. That happened, and then it stopped. And I understood, without being told, that I had just been greeted. "Vorkan," I said. "Is it communicating?" "Yes," Vorkan 7 said through the room's speakers, quietly. "Can it understand me?" "It has been listening to my records for 63 years, Vorkan 7 said. "It understands every language in my databanks." I looked at the center of the room, at the nothing that was watching. "So you have a question for me," I said. The feeling happened again, not rearranging this time, more like a question mark made out of light that you could not see. The impression of something leaning forward. I took that as a yes. "You want to know why humans build things they know will break," I said. The impression of leaning forward intensified. I had not prepared for this conversation. I had been aboard the ship for 4 hours. I had found out I owned something that the entire Galactic Compact was afraid to touch. I had eaten 2 of the emergency rations from the first crate because I had not had dinner, and now I was being asked by an entity that had dissolved 17 civilizations to explain one of the core features of human psychology. I thought about it. I thought about my salvage brokerage. I thought about the first time I started it, when I was 22 with borrowed equipment and a single contract. I thought about the first time it failed, which was 14 months later, which had been my own fault for taking on more than I could handle. I thought about starting it again at 25. I thought about the second time it started to fail, which was slower and more complicated, and had involved a business partner who turned out to have different ideas about what a business was for. I thought about starting it a third time, alone, smaller, with less borrowed equipment, and a much shorter list of people I trusted. I thought about the coffee mug in the crew mess, the ship that had been dark and waiting, the AI that had been talking to its own records for 11 years, and leaving a warm mug out, in case someone came. "Because the breaking is not the point," I said. The room did not change, but something in the quality of the nothing in the center of it shifted. "We build things knowing they will fail, because the failure is information," I said. "Because the second version is better than the first, because you cannot know how to build something that lasts until you have watched something fall down. Every broken thing we have ever made has taught us something we could not have known without making it." I paused. "And also," I said, "sometimes we build things because we need them right now, and we cannot wait until we know how to build them correctly. Sometimes a thing that lasts 6 months is better than nothing for 6 months." The impression in the room changed. Not agreement exactly. Not disagreement. Something more like a shift in the weight of the air, like a scale settling. And then something else came through. Not language, not the rearranging feeling. Something closer to a color that I was experiencing with the wrong senses. It took me a few seconds to translate it. It was a question about what I had said. The word that had caught. The word was information. "The failure gives us information," I said slowly, "because we write it down. We record it. We tell the next person what happened. We remember the thing that did not work, so that the thing that comes after it can work better." I looked at the dark floor of the chamber. We remember things that are gone. We keep records of things that have ended. That is how we make sure they were real. The room went very still. Not the stillness it had when I walked in. That had been the stillness of waiting. This was different. This was the stillness of something that had just heard a sound it had not expected. Vorkan 7 was quiet for a long time too. "Dara," he said finally, in a voice that was quieter than his usual register. "Yeah. I believe you may have just said something significant." "What did I say?" "You said we remember things that are gone. We keep records of things that have ended. That is how we make sure they were real." I stood there in the dark chamber, with the thing in the center of it that was no longer quite so still. "What are the 17 civilizations that it—" I stopped, chose my words carefully. What are the ones that are no longer here? Vorkin 7 did not answer immediately. When the answer came, it did not come from him. It came from the room. From the nothing in the center that shifted again, and this time the feeling was not a color, or a question mark, or a rearranging. This time, the feeling was the specific weight of someone carrying something for a very long time, and putting it down, and not being sure whether putting it down was allowed. Vorkin, I said quietly. Does it know their names? Yes, Vorkin 7 said. Does anyone else know their names? A very long pause. No, Vorkin 7 said. I stood in the middle of that chamber and thought about 63 years alone in a sealed hold on a ship that nobody wanted, carrying the names of 17 civilizations that the rest of the galaxy had no record of, and I thought about what that would do to something that could feel time passing. I want those names, I said. I want them recorded. The room moved. Not the floor or the walls, the air, the quality of the space itself, and this time, the impression that came through was not a color or a weight. It was unmistakably, clearly, undeniably, the impression of being looked at. Fully looked at, by something that had not truly looked at anything in a very long time. I held still and let it look. After a moment it stopped, and what replaced it was something I did not have a word for in any language I knew. The closest I could come was the feeling of a door, long locked, quietly opening from the inside. All right, I said to the room, and the ship, and the AI that had been alone in the dark for 63 years. We are going to need a plan. The problem with having a plan was that executing it required leaving the station, and leaving the station required a flight certification for the Covenant of Ends, and obtaining that certification required the Dorvac Station Registry Office, and the Registry Office operated on standard station hours which did not begin for another 6 hours. I spent those 6 hours aboard the ship. Vorkin 7 walked me through the systems properly this time, not as a new owner cataloging assets, but as someone who was going to fly the thing and needed to understand it. The drive was not just intact, it was running at 94% efficiency, which was better than most ships half its age. The navigation was updated to within 2 years of current charts. The weapons systems were functional, and I made a note to figure out what to do about that later, because a civilian salvage broker with a fully armed Marauder-class warship was the kind of thing that would attract official attention I did not need. The hull repair on the port side was structural but stable. Vorkin 7 told me it had happened on the original mission, during the containment of the entity in the hold, and that the repair had been done in deep space with what the crew had available, which had clearly been enough, but had not been pretty. I ate the rest of the emergency rations for breakfast. They were flavored in a way that suggested whoever had made them had heard a description of food, but had not personally encountered any. At 6 in the morning station time, I walked back through the restricted corridor to the main station and went to the registry office. The clerk on duty was a young human named Owen, fresh-faced, and clearly in the early part of a career he had not yet decided whether he wanted. I put the purchase documentation on his counter and told him I needed a flight certification for the Covenant of Ends. He looked at the documents. He looked up the ship in the system. He looked at the ship in the system for a long time. His expression went through several things in sequence that I recognized as the same sequence I had gone through the night before, ending in the particular look of someone who has decided to do the simple, procedural thing and not ask questions. He processed the certification in 14 minutes. "Safe travels," he said, in the voice of someone who was not sure that applied. I went back to my ship. The flight out of Dorvac was uneventful. The Covenant handled like nothing I had ever flown, which made sense because I had never flown a warship before, but once I understood the difference in responsiveness it was easier than I expected. Heavy but precise. The drive was quieter than anything that large had a right to be. Vorkin 7 was a good co-pilot. He did not offer commentary on my technique, and he anticipated every instrument check before I called for it. We had been in open space for 2 hours before I thought to ask him how long it had been since someone had actually flown the ship. 63 years, he said. Does it feel different? I said. Having someone aboard. A pause. Yes, he said. I did not press it. Some answers contain everything they need to. I spent the next 3 days learning the ship and thinking about the problem of the entity in the hold, and what exactly I was going to do with both of them. The entity had communicated twice more since that first night, both times brief impressions rather than full exchanges. Both times with the quality of something testing whether the connection we had made was still open. I answered both times. It seemed like the right thing to do. On the third day, Vorkin 7 told me something he had not told me yet. The 17 civilizations, he said. Their names. The singular has been attempting to communicate them to me since the first week of containment. I did not have a method to record them accurately. What kind of method do you need? The names are not in any language with a written form, Vorkin 7 said. They exist as impressions, as the feeling of a thing, rather than a label for it. I thought about the rearranging feeling, the color I had experienced with the wrong senses, the weight of the door opening. Like what it does when it communicates, I said. Yes. So the names are not words. No. They are more like the memory of the feeling of those civilizations existing. Vorkin 7 was quiet for a moment. That is an accurate description. I thought about this for a long time. I thought about human memory, which is not a recording but a reconstruction, which does not store facts but stores feelings attached to facts, which is why the same event remembered by 10 people produces 10 different versions, and all of them are true, in the ways that matter. I can learn them, I said. If it is willing to teach me, you would remember the feeling of 17 civilizations that no longer exist, Vorkin 7 said. The weight of that may be significant. Somebody has to, I said. Vorkin 7 did not argue with that. He opened the comm channel to the hold. What happened over the next several hours I cannot describe fully, because the language for it does not exist. The entity in the hold sent 17 impressions, one at a time, each one completely different from the others. Not names in any sense I had previously understood the word. More like the specific quality of light at a particular moment in a civilization's history, the way a species felt about water, or music, or the dark, or each other, the thing that made them irreplaceably themselves. I held each one for as long as I could. I found that if I did not try to translate them into words, they stayed clearer. I let them be what they were. By the 17th one I was sitting on the floor of the bridge again. My hands were in my lap and I was looking at nothing, and I felt the weight Vorkin 7 had warned me about. Not grief, exactly. Something older than grief. The feeling of knowing that something real had existed and was gone, and that knowing this was the only thing standing between it and the particular darkness of never having been at all. I have them, I said. The hold comm crackled. The impression that came through was the one I had started to recognize as the entity's version of acknowledgement, and alongside it, something new, something I had not felt before. I thought, for a moment, that it might be relief. On the fourth day, I started writing everything down. Not the names. Those lived where they were, and I would not insult them by trying to force them into letters on a screen. But everything else, the mission record that the compact had classified, the crew of the Covenant, whose names Vorkin 7 had in his memory, and read out to me one by one while I typed. Their roles, what they had found, what they had done, what had happened to the record of what they had done. The cover-up was extensive. 11 registry transfers in 60 years, 4 separate government departments that had passed responsibility back and forth, 2 declassification requests that had been buried so deep they had never received responses, an entire treaty designation, 7 Sigma, that existed in the compact legal system as a framework for exactly one sealed case. The crew records were the worst part. 47 people had been aboard the Covenant when it returned from the mission. Their personnel files had been flagged classified within 72 hours of the ship's return. They had been discharged quietly, scattered to different stations, and the official record contained no connection between them and the mission, no commendations, no notation of what they had done. They had captured something the entire compact was terrified of and brought it back at significant personal risk, and the response had been to make them officially not exist in that context. Do you know what happened to them? I asked Vorkin 7. After. I have tracked 14 of the original 47 through public records, he said. Of the 14, 3 are still living. The rest died between 8 and 40 years after the mission. None of their obituaries mentioned the Covenant. What are the 3 living ones' names? He told me. I added them to my document. On the 5th day, I did something I had been thinking about since the first night aboard. I sent a message to the Galactic Compact's Public Transparency Office. Not a complaint, not a legal filing, nothing that would get routed to a department and buried for another 60 years. A press release. Written in Compact Standard and translated into 11 other languages by Vorkin 7, who turned out to be an excellent editor. Clear, factual, no language that could be dismissed as sensational. It contained the mission records, the crew names, the registry transfers, the classified filings, the 3 living crew members, and at the bottom, as documentation, the full certification chain from my purchase of the Covenant of Ends at a government surplus auction, where I had been the only bidder, because someone had decided that losing the ship in a clearance sale was preferable to admitting what it was carrying. I sent it to 67 news organizations across the compact simultaneously, and then I put the ship in a holding orbit around a quiet patch of space outside any shipping lane, made a cup of coffee using the crew mess equipment that Vorkin 7 guided me through, because I had never used that particular model before, and I sat in the mess with the warm cup and waited. The first response came in 40 minutes. By the end of the first hour there were 200. By the end of the day there were 14 compact warships on an intercept course for the Covenant of Ends. I watched them on the navigation display and drank my coffee. "Vorkin," I said. "Yes. How long do we have before they reach us?" "At current intercept speed, 9 hours." "Good," I said. "That gives me time to finish the document." 14 warships was more than I had anticipated, though in fairness, I had not spent a lot of time anticipating the specific number. I had expected a response. I had expected it to be significant. I had not quite mapped out what significant would look like in practical terms, which was a gap in my planning that I was now addressing in real time. They arrived not quite simultaneously, because they had come from different directions, and there was a period of about 20 minutes where they were dropping out of faster-than-light travel one by one and arraying themselves around the Covenant, in a formation that was technically described as a containment perimeter, and that looked, from the inside, like being surrounded. The first hail came from the largest ship, a compact executive cruiser, called the Voice of Assembly, which was the kind of name that announced its own importance very thoroughly. The officer on the other end was not a person I recognized. She was tall, wearing the deep blue of Senior Compact Diplomatic Corps, with the precise posture of someone who had been in high-stakes conversations before and intended to control this one. "This is Compact Senior Representative Callie Ferris," she said. "I am addressing the occupant of the vessel designated Covenant of Ends. You will acknowledge." "Dara Voss," I said, "salvage broker, legal owner of this vessel, as of 5 days ago. I am happy to provide documentation." A pause. Not long, but long enough to tell me she had been briefed on the situation, and had hoped I would be more rattled than I was. "Ms. Voss," she said, "you are in possession of a classified compact asset. I am in possession of a vessel I purchased at a legal government surplus auction," I said. "The documentation was processed by your registry office. The transaction is on record. If the compact had concerns about the vessel being available for public sale, the time to raise those concerns was before the gavel came down, not after." Another pause. Longer. "The cargo aboard that vessel is classified under Treaty 7 Sigma," she said. "I have been thoroughly briefed on Treaty 7 Sigma," I said. "I have also been briefed on the fact that Treaty 7 Sigma is a classification framework that has been applied to a single case in the history of the compact, and that the primary function of that classification has been to prevent public knowledge of a cover-up that began 63 years ago. I have shared that briefing with 67 news organizations. You may have seen the press release." The silence on the other end of the comm lasted long enough that I wondered if the connection had dropped. "Ms. Voss," Callie Ferris said finally. Her voice had not changed. She was very good. "The entity aboard your vessel is a Tier 0 existential threat. The Compact's containment protocols exist for the safety of every species in this sector. The entity aboard my vessel has been peacefully contained for 63 years, I said. Longer than most of your member governments have been in their current administrative forms. It has communicated clearly and consistently. It has chosen not to use the capabilities that you are afraid of. And it has a request that I am prepared to deliver on its behalf." "A request," she said. "A formal request," I said. "Submitted to the Compact General Assembly and recorded in the public record. The entity requires an official acknowledgement, in all Compact languages, of the 17 civilizations it has encountered that no longer exist. A formal record, logged into the Compact historical database, that these civilizations were real, that they existed, that they are remembered." The hail channel was open to all 14 ships. I knew that because Vorkin 7 had told me, quietly, in my earpiece. I knew that every captain and senior officer on all 14 ships was hearing this. That is all it wants, I said. It does not want freedom of movement. It does not want political standing. It does not want anything that requires a change to existing compact law. It wants a record. It wants someone to say, in writing, that they were real. Representative Ferris was quiet for a long time. Why does it trust you to communicate this? She said. Because I was the only person who came aboard, I said. Because I sat on the floor of its containment chamber and listened. Because it asked me a question about why humans build things they know will break, and I told it the truth. Another silence. What truth? She said. That we build them anyway, I said. Because the failure teaches us. Because the record of the failure is how we make sure the next thing is better. Because remembering what broke is how we make sure it was real. 14 ships sitting in space around me, dozens of species, hundreds of officers who had come here expecting a hostage situation, or a weapons standoff, or something they had a protocol for. I would like, I said, to connect you directly to the entity aboard this ship, not for negotiation, simply to hear what I have heard. You do not have to agree to anything, you only have to listen. I looked at Vorkin 7's indicator on the console beside me. He was ready. He had been ready for 63 years. Representative Ferris, I said. I think you will find that the thing you have been afraid of for 6 decades has been trying to tell you something that you should have been told a long time ago. The comm was quiet. Outside the viewport, the 14 warships sat motionless in space, their running lights steady, their weapons systems not charging. That was something. That was enough to work with. Give me 10 minutes, Callie Ferris said. She came back in 7. Open the channel, she said. I looked at Vorkin 7's console. The blue lights ran their sequence. The hold comm opened. And the Vreth Singular, which had been alone in the dark for 63 years, with nothing but the records of a ship that had stayed with it, out of something that a less careful observer might not have called loyalty, reached through the open channel with the gentlest version of itself that I had come to know, and let itself be heard. What happened on those 14 ships in the next 4 minutes, I only know secondhand, from the reports that came out later. What I know directly is what I felt in the bridge of the Covenant, the quality of the air shifting, the impression of something very large paying careful attention to a very large room, the feeling, which I had begun to recognize, of something carrying a weight for a very long time and testing whether the floor could hold it if it were set down. Then it stopped. The comm was silent. Then Callie Ferris said, in a voice that was not quite the same as the voice she had used 7 minutes ago, I understand the request. Good, I said. I will need to convene an emergency session of the General Assembly. I will wait, I said. I am not going anywhere. The emergency session of the General Assembly took 11 days, which is fast by compact standards, and which tells you something about what the entity had communicated through that open channel. Vorkin 7 followed the proceedings on the public broadcast and gave me summaries, because the full sessions ran to 9 and 12 hours, and I had a ship to manage. The debate was heated. There were governments that wanted the acknowledgement to stay classified. There were governments that wanted a more extensive formal process. There were 3 governments that wanted to reopen the question of the original containment mission, and who had authorized it, and who had authorized the cover-up of it, which opened a different and longer argument. But the acknowledgement motion itself passed, on the 8th day, unanimous vote, which surprised me, and which Vorkin 7 said had not happened on a motion of that category in 31 years. The formal document was long. It listed all 17 civilizations, using the compact's best linguistic approximation of their names, which were imprecise but present, which was the difference between existing and not existing in a database that 3,000 worlds could access. It stated explicitly that the Covenant of Ends had made contact with a Vreth Singular, that the crew had acted with distinction, and that the subsequent classification of those records had been an administrative error of significant magnitude. The phrase administrative error of significant magnitude was doing a lot of work in that sentence, but I accepted it, because the names were there, and the record was there, and that was what mattered. The 3 surviving crew members were contacted by the Compact directly. Do not know exactly what was said in those conversations. What I know is that 2 of them issued public statements within 24 hours. The 3rd did not, but Vorkin 7 received a private message from her that said simply, "Thank you for keeping the ship." He did not tell me what the message said for 2 days. When he did, his voice was in its quietest register. the one I had come to associate with things he had been holding for a long time. On the 11th day, the formal document was transmitted to the Covenant of Ends and filed in the compact historical database. I read it in the crew mess with my coffee. When I finished, I sat for a while and thought about nothing in particular, which is what I do when I have been thinking very hard about something for a long time, and I finally do not have to anymore. Then I took my coffee and went down to the maintenance corridor and through the reinforced doors into the containment chamber. "The record is filed," I said. "They are in the database. 17 entries. They will not be removed. The Compact's data preservation protocols apply." The room shifted. The feeling that came through was the one I had come to know best by now, the one that was the entity's closest equivalent to something a human might call okay. Not happiness, not relief, not resolution in any tidy sense. Just the feeling of a weight that has been held for a very long time, reaching a point of equilibrium. Then something new, an impression I had not received before, directional in a way the others had not been. The quality of a question pointed not at me but outward, at the space beyond the ship's hull. "You want to go somewhere?" I said. The impression of yes. "Where?" I said. What came through was not a place I knew, not a location in the current compact charts. It was the feeling of a specific kind of space, a specific distance, a direction that my body understood, even though my navigation console had no entry for it. I looked at the coordinates I was somehow holding in my head, having not been told them in any language I could account for. "Vorkin," I said. "I received it as well," he said through the chamber speakers. "I am cross-referencing against historical charts." A pause. "That sector," Vorkin 7 said, "is listed in charts predating the current compact as an unverified deep space region beyond the outer survey boundary. There are no current entries. There are also no entries from the period prior to the compact's formation." "Nothing was ever there," I said. "Or nothing that was there was ever recorded," Vorkin 7 said. I thought about that, about records, and the absence of records, and what the absence meant. "How far?" I said. "At Covenant's maximum drive capacity, 14 days. I looked at the nothing in the center of the room that had told me the names of 17 civilizations, in a language made of light and weight, and the specific quality of things that used to be. "We will take you," I said. The room shifted, and the feeling that came through this time was something I had no frame for at all, something so large and quiet and old that I did not try to translate it. I let it be what it was, and I stood in it for a moment, and then I nodded. 14 days, I said. I am going to need better rations. We left on the 12th day. Callie Ferris had not been pleased about the destination being outside compact space, which was a reasonable concern, and one I had no easy answer for. I told her what I knew, that the entity had a destination, that it had chosen not to act against the ship or crew in 63 years of containment, and that the alternative to allowing it to return to wherever it was going was to recommit it to indefinite containment, which was the decision that had resulted in everything that had just happened. She filed a formal objection and sent a single escort vessel to follow at a distance. I thought that was fair. The 14 days were, by a significant margin, the most unusual 2 weeks I had experienced. The entity communicated more freely as we traveled, not in bursts but in a continuous low quality of presence that was like having a very large, very quiet companion that you could not see. Vorkin 7 and I fell into a rhythm. He ran the ship, I ran the navigation. In the evenings, by the crew mess standard, we talked. Not about the mission or the compact or the press coverage, which had been extensive and which I had largely stopped reading after the first week because it was making me tired. We talked about other things. He told me about the original survey mission, the parts of it before the find, the planets they had catalogued, and the anomalies they had recorded, and the small incidents that happen on any long voyage that never make it into official logs. He had been awake for all of it. He had perfect memory. I told him about Dorvac Station and salvage brokering, and the 3 times I had started the business, and what I had learned each time it did not work the way I expected. He was a very good listener. On the 9th day, he said, "Dara, yeah. I would like to update my crew register." I looked up from the navigation charts. "What do you mean?" "My crew register has been empty since the original crew was discharged," he said. "I would like to add an entry." I understood what he was saying. "Yeah," I said. "Add it." He was quiet for a moment. "Crew," he said. "One human. Owner and operator. Dara Voss. Date of addition. Current." He paused again. "I will leave the end date field blank," he said. "Good," I said. "Leave it blank." On the 14th day, the navigation system ran out of chart data and kept going anyway, because Vorkin 7 was following the directional impression that the entity had given us, rather than the charts. And after 6 hours of travel on that heading, we reached a place that looked like empty space. Empty except for what the long-range sensors were returning, which was data that Vorkin 7 was quiet about for a long time before he said, "I do not have a category for what I am reading." "What does it feel like?" I said. "Like the space here is older," he said. "Like it has been used for something for a very long time, and is resting." The entity moved before I could respond. Not violently, not dramatically. It simply moved through the hull of the ship, the way a thought moves through a memory, with no resistance, and no damage, and the slight sensation of something very large passing very close. I felt it go. The crew mess felt different after. The chamber was empty when Vorkin 7 checked, and I had not needed him to check to know it. I looked out the viewport at the old space. For a moment, not long, perhaps 5 seconds, the quality of the space in front of us changed. Not visibly, not in any way the sensors captured, but in the way I had learned to register over the past 3 weeks, in the way that lived in your teeth and behind your eyes, and in the part of your chest where things lived that you did not say out loud. Something that was not quite a word, and not quite a feeling, but somewhere between the two, passed through the ship from front to back, like a very old door closing gently behind someone who had finally arrived where they were going. Then the space went back to being space. The escort vessel caught up to us 40 minutes later. Callie Ferris's face appeared on the comm, professional, composed, with a quality around the eyes that I recognized because I had seen it in the mirror that morning. "Status report," she said. "The cargo has been delivered," I said, "to its point of origin, whatever that was. Are you able to quantify what just occurred?" "No," I said. She nodded once. She looked out at the space on her end of the comm for a moment. "The General Assembly is preparing a second motion," she said, "regarding the surviving crew members of the Covenant and the formal recognition of the mission." "I know," I said. "Vorkin told me." A pause. "Vorkin 7? He follows the public proceedings," I said. "He has a lot of time." She looked at the comm screen, as if she was trying to work out something about that, then decided not to. "Ms. Voss," she said, "the Compact would like to extend an official thanks for your role in this situation." "I bought a ship at an auction," I said. "Everything else followed from that." "Yes," she said. "We are aware." She paused. "We have also reviewed the processing of that auction. There appear to have been certain irregularities in how the lot was classified and made available." "I am sure that is true," I said. "The Compact may wish to discuss the return of the vessel to government registry," she said carefully. I looked around the bridge of the Covenant of Ends, at Vorkin 7's console with its blue running lights, at the crew mess viewport where a coffee mug sat on the table, warm, because Vorkin 7 had turned the thermal cycle back on that morning without being asked. "The vessel is not available for return," I said. "I have a receipt." Callie Ferris looked at me for a long moment. "Your salvage license," she said. "The one you obtained as part of the acknowledgement agreement. I understand it does not currently cover your vessel class." "That is correct. The Compact can process an upgrade," she said, "as a courtesy." "I would appreciate that," I said. She closed the comm. I sat in the pilot's chair for a while and looked at the old space outside the viewport that was just space again now, or maybe had always been just space, and had shown me briefly what else it might be. Behind me, the Covenant of Ends breathed in its particular way, the drive at its low resting frequency, the systems cycling through their maintenance checks, the air recyclers running steady. "Vorkin," I said. "Yes." "Mission log." A pause. "Ready." "Entry 2848, I said. "Cargo delivered. Crew, 1 human, 1 AI. Point of return, uncharted, beyond outer boundary. Exact nature undetermined. Mission objective met. Acknowledgement secured, formal record filed. 17 civilizations entered into permanent compact historical record." I paused. "Salvage license upgrade pending," I added. "Rations still terrible." Vorkin 7's console ran its sequence of blue lights. Noted, he said. I pulled up the galactic net feed on the navigation screen, because old habits do not quit easily, and I had a lease payment coming up, and a ship that needed proper rations, and a salvage license that was about to get significantly more interesting. Seized assets, unclaimed, hazard flagged, non-specific. There were 19 new listings since I had last checked. I started reading. Outside the viewport, the stars sat in their old positions, keeping their own records, remembering in their own way the things that had moved between them, which was everything, which was everyone, which was every civilization that had ever looked up at them and built something that would break. I found a listing that looked promising. I read past the first sentence this time, only a little past. Some things you learn not to change too much.